This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. The holidays are over, the decorations are down, and suddenly everything feels a little empty. It's normal to feel the winter blues after the holiday excitement. January, February, and March are by far my least favorite months of the year. It's cold and dark, and I have to get some extra vitamin D on board. I also need to keep my regular scheduled appointments with my therapist. So if you're feeling that post-holiday funk, I definitely suggest you checking out BetterHelp because maybe it's time to talk. You might also be one of those people like me who makes New Year's resolutions and you get super motivated. So maybe you need someone behind you to hold you accountable and come up with a plan to meet your goals. BetterHelp is super convenient, totally online. You have a therapist right at your fingertips whenever you need them. So head over to betterhelp.com/wifeofcrime1 to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/wifeofcrime1 for 10% off your first month. You know, Russ, unsolved murders are really tough because there's no closure or justice for the families. The case I'm going to tell you about today is probably one of the most infamous unsolved murder cases in the U.S. 72 years later, there is still one suspect that everyone thinks did it, but they couldn't pin it on him. This is the case of the Black Dahlia.
Welcome back to Wife of Crime. I'm Russ, here with Jess, my wife. She's telling me stories, and I'm listening.
Yes, welcome back to Wife of Crime, everybody. So this week, Russ, I'm telling you about the Black Dahlia. Have you ever heard of the Black Dahlia?
I don't know. I seen like a lady. I don't know. I don't think so. We used to call Black Dahlia at a bar that I used to work at. I would put ink around the rim of a beer that people are annoying, and then people would get ink all over their lips, and we would call that the Black Dahlia.
Really?
Yeah, and then it would get all in their teeth, and the girls that would think they were cute and flirting all the time, their teeth would be all black with ink.
You would put ink on the top of their beer bottle?
Yeah, so we would like take the thing of a pen out and turn it upside down and blow it onto the beer bottle.
Oh.
Yeah.
You did it to people like as a prank?
Yeah.
And you called it the Black Dahlia?
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
Even if it was blue ink.
You should do it to people who don't tip you. Always tip your bartenders, people.
Oh, we did it to them too.
That's so funny. Well, the Black Dahlia is a really interesting case. I always heard of Black Dahlia, but I didn't really know what the case was and all the details of it until I listened to a podcast, a really good podcast. It's called Root of Evil. And it's about... it's actually this whole family, and they talk about all their family issues, but the guy who's one of the main suspects in the Black Dahlia case, his family has this podcast called Root of Evil, and it's about him and their whole family's really dark history. It's pretty cool.
He thinks his family's the Black Dahlia, or he knows?
No. It's the guy who's suspected of killing the Black Dahlia.
All right, so I don't know the story, so none of it means anything. I'll understand that later.
Yeah, I'll explain it now. So, the Black Dahlia is actually a woman that the media named her the Black Dahlia after she was murdered.
Was that her name, Dahlia?
No, her name was Elizabeth Short.
Okay.
But she got the nickname the Black Dahlia from the media. So, okay, let me tell you this story. Here we go. January 15th, 1947... a woman named Betty Bersinger, along with her 3-year-old daughter, they decided they wanted to get up early and walk to the store. It was in the Crenshaw neighborhood of LA, and it's around 10 a.m., and they see this body laying in an empty lot. At first, Betty thought that it was a discarded store mannequin. But
it's never a mannequin.
Yeah, you and I both know it's never a mannequin from all the true crime we've listened to and stuff we've read. Never a mannequin. So
Why does that even come to people's head? There's no such thing as random mannequins outside.
Well, when I tell you what the body looked like, you might understand why she thought it was a mannequin. So she told reporters that the body was so white that it didn't even look like a person. The body was completely cut in half. Okay? And it was drained of all the blood. There was absolutely no blood anywhere, and it was drained completely of blood, so it was very, very white, like pearly white. The bottom half of Elizabeth Short's body was about a foot away from the top half. So there was like a foot gap between the top and bottom half. Okay. Her intestines were all tucked underneath of her butt. So she was like, the bottom half of her was laying on top of her intestines. So it just was a gap between the top and bottom half of her body, okay, with no organs showing at all.
Neat work.
Huh?
Neat work.
Very precise work. So her arms were positioned over her head with her elbows bent at a 90-degree angle.
So this looks like it was staged, like the way she's propped.
Oh, very staged. Yeah, very staged. She had her face slashed from her mouth all the way to her ears, creating a smile.
Like the Joker.
Like the Joker, yeah. And they call this the Glasgow smile. And the reason they call it that is because in Scotland in the 20s and 30s, all the street gangs, when they would kill people, they would do that to them. And they called it the Glasgow smile. So she had this Glasgow smile.
So they think the Scottish people did it.
No, they don't think they did. That's just why they call it the Glasgow smile. But she had it. She was completely severed from her mouth to her ears. She also had like multiple abrasions all over her body and cuts. And then she had chunks of flesh missing in different parts of her body.
Like a bite?
Well, like cut out. Like parts of flesh cut out. And then she had, I told you her arms were above her head. What else am I missing? Oh yeah, a piece of her breast was missing. Cut out too. And she had bruises all over her head. So it looked like she had been hit in the head. So a crowd of people began to gather, and reporters and police. And when the reporters started gathering, everyone started taking pictures of this dead body. And
they didn't have camera phones. How?
No, they had cameras.
People walking around had cameras.
No, the reporters started taking pictures. Because the reporters gathered and the police gathered, and then they started taking all these pictures and publishing these gruesome pictures right away. They were like, it was like front page news. It was a huge deal.
That's nuts.
People hadn't seen anything like that. When they published her picture, though, they covered her body, like part of her body, with a blanket, and they actually blurred the smile lines that he created because it was too gruesome for people. So when you look up pictures of the Black Dahlia, you can just see the pictures of her body covered with a blanket, and you don't really see the
Yeah, because that's pretty shitty. Like, you don't want your family member posted on a newspaper or something.
Yeah. Well, they really had a field day. The media had a field day with this. So they started publishing the gruesome photos. The next morning, an autopsy was performed. They took fingerprints of the woman, because at the time they didn't know who this woman was. They took fingerprints, and back in the day, they had this technology called sound photo, and it's like a really old fax machine. So they took the fingerprints from the body, and they sent it through this technology, this archaic technology, to the FBI in D.C. She had been arrested for underage drinking, so her fingerprints were on file, and that was how they were able to identify her. So they ended up identifying her as Elizabeth Short. Just to tell you a little bit about Elizabeth Short, she was a young woman originally from Boston, Massachusetts. She was one of 5 daughters, and her father abandoned the family when his business went bust in the crash of 29. You know, the stock market crash of 29. He lost his business and all his money.
Yeah, the Great Depression.
Yeah, like kicked off the Great Depression. So when that happened, he staged his own suicide and made his family think that he committed suicide, but he really didn't.
He was a coward.
Yeah, he ran off to L.A. and left his wife and 5 daughters to fend for themselves.
Oh boy, bailed out.
So she grew up pretty poor in a house full of her sisters and her mom. And then when she was a sophomore in high school, she dropped out of high school, and she found out that her father was still alive. They got in contact with him, and she decided to move to L.A. and stay with him. She obviously...
He did it.
She Well, no, he didn't do it. But she wanted to have she had like aspirations of being famous, you know, like most people.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
And we're doing a podcast. I don't want to be famous. Don't bother me if you see me.
Well, she wanted to be famous, and so when she found out her father was living in LA, she dropped out of high school and moved to LA and decided to try to work at being an actress. When she came out here, she and him did not end up getting along, and she moved out of the house, got a job as a waitress, and she rented a room behind this club on Hollywood Boulevard. So that's just a little bit about her. So once Elizabeth Short was identified, like I said, the media had this huge field day, and the Los Angeles Examiner were the first people to contact her mother in Boston. The cops didn't even contact her mother first. The Los Angeles Examiner got her mother's name, called her mother, and said, "Your daughter won a beauty contest. We want to get more information about her, about her past, where she comes from, about her family."
Tricky.
So they got all these questions answered, and at the end of their interview over the phone, they said, "By the way, your daughter really didn't win a beauty pageant. She's actually dead."
It was like, she was too ugly. She didn't really win. Dead.
She was actually beautiful. She
Really?
was gorgeous, yeah. But they tricked their mother and told her at the end, "We just wanted all this information. Your daughter's actually dead, and she was the victim of a really brutal murder."
Hopefully they didn't say it how you just said it.
No, I think they did. They have no heart. They just wanted their information. They wanted to get their story out as soon as possible because they wanted to be the first people to do it. So, like I said, Elizabeth Short was actually really beautiful. She got the nickname Black Dahlia because she had jet black hair and bright green eyes and pale skin. She wore black tailored suits a lot, and so that's why she got the nickname Black Dahlia. And some people say she had that nickname beforehand because she walked around in these tight, black tailored, perfectly tailored suits.
Seems like a little gothy.
And, well, at the time, she was very stylish. This was the 40s, so.
Oh.
Okay, so back to the autopsy. So the LA County Coroner noted that the person responsible for this, without a doubt, had to be trained as a surgeon. Because the way they cut the body in half was a specific technique that certain surgeons used to perform or that they're trained in. And it's a technique where they go between the second and third lumbar vertebrae so they don't hit any organs. So it's like this specific technique that only surgeons know. So they had to be trained in medicine or anatomy, not just some random Joe Schmo serial killer who's just butchering her with a knife or whatever.
Yeah, because you probably can't look that up. There's no internet. You have to have been taught that.
Yeah, you had to have gone to school. So 9 days after the body was found, an envelope appeared at the offices of the LA Examiner. The envelope was addressed using like cutout letters from magazines and
This is where all these other
papers.
serial killers got that from.
Probably. So it was addressed using these letters like cut out from magazines and newspapers, and the front of it said, "LA Examiner and other papers. Here is Dahlia's belongings." When you opened up the envelope, there was her social security card, her birth certificate, a bunch of photos, and her address book. And all the items were doused in gasoline, so there were no fingerprints on it. And even the envelope was covered in gasoline, so no fingerprints.
This
were on
person
it.
knows what they're doing.
They do.
And this obviously isn't the only person they killed if they're this good at it.
Exactly. That's what I think too. So over the course of the investigation, 13 letters were sent to the press, all with similar handwriting and cutouts from papers and magazines. And all of them were signed Black Dahlia Avenger. So at the end of whatever they would say, it would say the Black Dahlia Avenger.
That's corny.
Very corny. So something to think about is that in the 40s, LA was a very corrupt place. The LAPD was known for being super corrupted. They were always being bribed by the mob. There were a lot of crooked cops. It was just the LAPD was a very crooked organization back then. So there's just something just to keep in mind when you hear the story.
I think everyone's crooked in general. I don't trust a soul.
I agree. Well, I trust some people. I trust you.
Yeah, but you don't have to lump me into or put yourself in every situation I say. Like, if I don't trust a soul, obviously, I'm married to you. I trust you.
Well, that's true. Well,
That was dumb.
no, it wasn't. Anyway, okay. So the investigation gets underway. There are about 75 men that they question. They go through her address book, and they pretty much, any person with a male name, they bring it in. They just want to question everybody she knows.
Wait, she was a little fast pants. 75 men in her address book?
Well, they could have just been, a lot of them said they were just acquaintances, they were just friends that she met, waitressing, things like that. Like, she didn't necessarily date all of them. They were just people in her address book, and anyone with a male name, they questioned. But there were some pages ripped out of the address book. And this led the detectives to think that the killer might have known her and ripped the pages out that their information was on.
Or she could have ripped them out to remember someone's phone number, like, I'm going to take this with me. Like,
yeah, that's true. It could have been just a coincidence.
There's a chance, but they're reaching.
It could have been a coincidence, definitely. So on top of the 75 men that they questioned, they also questioned 300 USC medical students. And everything came up with no leads. Like, there was just nothing.
Were the medical students just to, like, confirm that this was done by a surgeon, or no?
I think they were just questioning tons of medical students because they thought that it had to have been a doctor or someone in medical school or something. So they were just trying to, like, rule out anyone who could possibly know how to cut a body like that.
That makes a little sense.
So 300 of them were questioned, and they were just getting nowhere. There was one set of fingerprints found on one of the 13 envelopes. So they slipped up a little bit, and one of the envelopes had a pair of fingerprints, but it didn't match anybody in the system.
Might have been the mailman.
Could have been the mailman. It could. So whoever it was not in the system, so they've never been booked. So it wasn't someone who was a career criminal or had committed crimes before, because they were super excited when they got this fingerprint.
No, that's not true. It could have just been someone that commits crimes. This isn't a first crime. It could have been someone that commits crimes but never got caught. They were smart.
That's what I just said. Someone that has never been booked. I just said it's someone who has never been booked for a crime.
You're right.
Yeah.
All right. You got it.
So, unfortunately, this case went cold.
Too bad we can't edit that out. I look dumb there. Let's roll.
It's all right. I look dumb sometimes, too. All right. So, after about 72 years, it's been 72 years since this crime was committed, and there are only 3 suspects that people continue to wonder about.
Well, whoever did it is dead.
Yeah, whoever did it is probably dead.
Yeah.
But still, it went cold, and there was never closure, and this poor girl got murdered, and no one will ever know why or the circumstances surrounding it. But there are 3 suspects who still remain suspects to this day. So I'm going to go through each suspect, and you tell me what you think.
In the nursing homes, or they're dead?
No, they're all dead.
Okay.
Suspect number 1. So a detective named Ralph Asdell, who is the last living member of the team who investigated the murder. He was interviewed in 1997, and during this interview, he claimed that a few weeks after the crime, he knew who killed her. And he said there was a man who drove a black car, who a lot of witnesses saw this man driving a black car around the empty lot. And they found a guy with the same car who had just got a fresh paint job and who matched the description of the man. They found him, but they didn't have enough evidence to pin anything on him.
Description of the man? Who? No one gave a description.
Yes, the witnesses saw a man in a black car driving around the lot, and they gave descriptions to the police. And so they found a guy matching the descriptions, but they didn't have enough evidence to put anything on him.
Okay.
So this detective, Ralph, in 1987, said he's known who did it the entire time, but there's not enough evidence to pin it on him. And for 50 years, this has been the guy, and he hasn't been able to do anything about it, which is super annoying.
I mean, if he really believes it, they could have followed him. He's definitely someone that does some shady shit.
I feel like he's a bad detective because if you know for a fact that this guy matches the description, how are you not going to find a way to get him to be the guy that you pin the crime on?
Ralph's lazy.
Lazy. Sounds like a lazy detective to me, too.
R.I.P. Ralph. You did your best.
Well, I don't know if Ralph's
Maybe.
necessarily dead, but whoever it was that he believed did it is probably dead because
Probably
it's
like
been
140 now.
All right, so suspect number 2 is pretty interesting. His name is Robert Red Manley, and he started dating Elizabeth Short.
Like Robert Redford. It's probably where he got his name.
Well, his name is Robert Manley, but his nickname is Red. They called him Red.
Because he was red. He's probably Irish.
Maybe he has red hair, possibly. So he began dating Elizabeth Short 1 month before she was murdered. He met her at a bus stop in San Diego, and at first she totally ignored him, but he was like super persistent, and finally she agreed to go on a date with him. They dated for about a month, and one night she called him randomly and said the place she was staying at fell through, and she needed him to come pick her up. So he came, he picked her up, and then they stayed in a hotel together for a couple nights. After that, he had to go out of town, so he dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th. This is the last place Elizabeth Short was seen alive. This was 6 days before her body was discovered. But the last place she was seen alive was the Biltmore Hotel. He was the last person that she was seen spending time with. And her body was discovered 6 days later. Now, investigators questioned him heavily, and gave him 2 polygraphs that he passed.
They had lie detector tests back then. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I guess so, because that's what they said when I was researching it. He passed 2 polygraphs.
That's crazy. Like, that shows how primitive lie detector tests are and how, like, they're not reliable.
They're really not reliable. I was listening to this podcast about lie detectors. I think it was on This American Life, or I can't remember which one, maybe TED Talks. But there's a guy who used to be a polygraph administrator, or what are they called? The guy who administers the polygraph. Polygrapher. And
you didn't just repeat that.
I know you made that up. I'm kidding. Polygrapher. And he now goes around the country and talks about how to pass a lie detector because he knows that they're like easily passable.
Yeah, I just think they're bullshit. And if you ever like are asked to take a lie detector test, say no. But a fun fact that Jess didn't know, I once took a lie detector test.
You did?
Yes.
For what?
When I was younger, I was an electrician's helper, and we were working in a check cashing place.
Uh-huh.
And I was working with this other dude, and they said $5,000 went missing. It wasn't me.
Why didn't you ever tell me you took a lie detector test? That's like something that you would think you would tell me.
I was saving it for one day if we ever did a podcast.
You really did? How nerve-wracking. Were you sweating?
No, because I thought they were legit because I was stupid. So I was like, I didn't steal the money. I was broke. And so I took the lie detector test, and they said I passed. And when the other dude went to take the lie detector test, they said he was very adamant, like, Russ didn't do it. And then he admitted it, that he did it.
Oh, wow.
But they said I passed the lie detector test. And I had no doubt that I was going to pass because I didn't do it, and I thought they were, like, legit.
Yeah, but I would still, even though I know I didn't do something, if I went in even knowing I was innocent, I would still be nervous that I would be so nervous that I would fail.
And all that for $5,000? Give me a break. It wasn't the police. They were doing like a private investigation. They were going to like break people's hands. It was like
it was not like a police lie detector.
No.
Oh.
So I guess I never thought like to not take it. I was like, sure, I'll take it. I didn't take nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, and then this dummy, he went and bought himself like an old school car after he stole the money. And it was like a piece of junk, too.
Did he get his legs broke? I feel like he would have had some guys after him. Oh, okay.
I think he gave it back.
Wow, that's so interesting. We've literally been together for 9 years, and I never knew you took a lie detector test.
Told you. I'm saving a few more for the podcast. They're coming.
Okay. I feel like I don't even know you right now.
Well, you just know I could pass a lie detector test.
Scary stuff. Okay. Wow, that's interesting. So he passed the lie detector test twice. Robert Manley, the guy who was dating her. And then, weird twist-turny events, he ended up in a mental institution for a short amount of time. And while he was institutionalized, he was given sodium pentothal, which is truth serum. They gave it to him.
Is that real stuff?
I think it's not like that real.
It's like a witch's potion.
No, I mean, sodium pentothal is real, but I don't know if it actually makes you just tell the truth. Or if it's kind of a thing they say happens to get people to admit to things.
I always tell the truth for the people out there.
He does always tell the truth, whether I like it or not. It's very true.
Yeah, even
if you're in Russ's life, you're going to hear the truth whether you like it or not. But at least he's honest. He won't lie to you.
Yeah, she always goes, I always wanted someone that was truthful until I met you. I wish you would just lie sometimes.
I do. I tell him that all the time. I say, I wish you would just lie. Okay, so he was given sodium pentothal, and he was questioned again, and he still professed his innocence, and he was adamant about the fact that he was innocent.
I believe him.
Eventually died January 9th, 1986.
I bet he loved her, and that's why he kept professing his innocence. Not loved, but he probably wanted to be with her, and he might have been a little sad. Russ, the profile, is on the case.
Yeah, I think that he was innocent, because our next suspect is who I think did it. And now we're going to talk about a disgusting man named George Hodel. This man, I firmly believe, is the killer of the Black Dahlia. And not just me. A lot of people believe it, even his own family. So, Dr. George Hodel.
Doctor, here we go.
He was a doctor. He was a wealthy doctor in LA, and he was apparently very well-connected. Quote-unquote well-connected. We know what that means.
Money.
Not just money, connected with the mob. He was, well-connected with people. And he had a crazy high IQ. He ran a venereal disease clinic, interestingly enough.
I didn't know they had STDs back then. I thought they were, new.
No, they had STDs back then. They didn't necessarily have HIV. That happened in the 80s, but they had syphilis. Syphilis has been around for a long time. They had hepatitis.
From having sex with monkeys.
They had
and stuff,
chlamydia,
probably.
Gonorrhea. No, the monkey thing was HIV.
So are they sure about that?
It's a rumor.
Wow.
But anyway, so he ran a venereal disease clinic in LA, which made him very up on everybody's sex life. He knew who was having sex with who. He was all involved in all this weird sex stuff. Okay?
Wait, doctors don't ask who you had sex with, their name.
He did. He was very wealthy. He had a lot of rich friends. He treated a lot of people for STDs who were having nasty, sex lives. And he was all up in it. He also trained as a surgeon in med school. That's originally what he went to med school for. And apparently he passed med school with flying colors because he was incredibly intelligent. It was said that him and Elizabeth Short were seen together in a cocktail lounge at a hotel in LA. So years later, George's son, Steve Hodel, who was a retired LAPD detective, years and years later, we're talking 40, 50 years, he found 2 photos in his father's house of a woman who looked exactly like Elizabeth Short. And this led Steve Hodel down this rabbit hole of investigating his own father for the murder of Elizabeth Short.
Damn, that's not a loyal son.
Well, he was a terrible father. So, some people say, is it indicative that, he really could have done it? Because Steve Hodel was a really decorated detective, who was very, he solved a lot of cases. He was a really good detective. Does it show a family vendetta? He was a bad father, so his son wants to make him look like a terrible person? Or does it show that he actually is capable of doing it because he was a terrible person?
Yeah, and he obviously didn't trust his dad, because if you trust your dad, you'd be like, no, he didn't do that. I'm not even going to pay attention to it.
Exactly. So Steve Hodel, after he found these photos, he went down this long rabbit hole, which led him to firmly believe his father was a Black Dahlia murderer, and he has written multiple books about it. And he has some pretty compelling evidence.
How many books can you write about that? It sounds like he's
I think he has 4. He has a lot of evidence against his father.
Bro, you're overdoing it.
But
One book is enough.
He's also implicated him in other murders, aside from the Black Dahlia.
Yeah, because
he thinks his father was a serial killer.
Yeah, that's not your first
essentially.
murder. Get out of here.
He also accused his father of a murder of another woman named Jean French, and this woman was found only 3 weeks after the Black Dahlia was found, and her body was also mutilated in a similar way. It was also posed in a similar way, and it was found in an empty lot, just like Elizabeth Short's body was. There was initials written in red lipstick, BD, on this girl's stomach, which they think stood for Black Dahlia.
Maybe it was her baby daddy.
Shut up. You're so stupid.
BD.
No, Black Dahlia, written in red lipstick. Anyway, so he has a lot of evidence against...
I'm throwing things to the wall, seeing if they're sticking.
So Steve Hodel has a lot of evidence, like I said. He hired handwriting experts to compare all the 13 letters that were written from the killer to his father's handwriting, which most of them say matches his father's handwriting.
That's not a science. Most say. I mean, some say no. Get out of here.
I mean, obviously there's going to always be handwriting experts. They're experts in that thing. However, it is one of those fields that it's a little bit subjective. Like, there's no way to prove 100%. You're still kind of going off of someone's opinions. But they're experts in that field, but they're still it's kind of opinion based.
I'm kind of interested in the relationship between this guy and his dad a little. I'd like to know a little bit about it.
If you listen to the podcast Root of Evil, you will learn all about George Hodel and the relationship with his children.
I never finished podcasts, so I stopped listening to him after like 6
really
episodes.
Good. It's a 7-part podcast about him and his children and everything they think about how he is the killer.
Maybe one day.
So there's more evidence. I'm going to tell you more evidence. So George Hodel owned this gigantic mansion in LA, and it's called the Sowden House, and it looks like a Mayan temple.
I thought you were going to say it was the Hodel Hotel.
No. No, it's called the Sowden House, and it looks like a Mayan temple, right? And inside of this house, there was a secret room that the children were not allowed to go into.
I want a secret room.
I'll show you pictures of the house. I'll post them on wifeofcrime.com, the pictures of the house.
Okay.
So there was this secret room that the children weren't allowed to go into. And George Hodel would host these elaborate parties, like sex parties with tons of orgies. And people would come there and get really high. They would do tons of drugs and have lots of sex there.
Maybe he was promoting his business because they were having orgies and he was bringing in STD girls to give everyone orgies, and then his business was booming.
Only you would think of that.
Why? But look how much money he'd make.
It's true, but...
Bringing these pretty dirty girls.
I think he's just a disgusting
or dirty
human
guys,
being.
but not really. Guys are nasty.
But he's just a disgusting human being. So he had these elaborate parties and lots of orgies and sex.
Probably hand out his business cards like, hey, after this party, come see me.
True. Now, about a week before the body was discovered, multiple bags of concrete were delivered to the Sowden house for quote-unquote construction. At the scene of the crime...
But his name was Hodel, and he had a party full of hoes at the Hodel mansion. That was pretty funny. I'm sorry. It just popped in my brain.
Listen. So the concrete bags were delivered to his house for quote-unquote construction. At the scene of the crime, there were 2 concrete bags similar to the ones that were delivered to his house found. And investigators thought that that whoever the killer was used the concrete bags to transport the body into this empty lot.
All right.
Another piece of evidence was his father drove a black 1936 Packard, which is a perfect match for the car that everyone kept seeing driving around the empty lot earlier that morning before the body was found. According to Steve Hodel and others close to George Hodel, he was obsessed with an artist named Man Ray. And I looked up this artist and his paintings. One of the paintings that Man Ray has is of a woman naked with her arms above her head in the same fashion that Elizabeth Short's arms were, like this, bent at the elbows above her head, with blood seeping out from the bottom of the body. So a lot of people think, and he was obsessed with this artist, and he had paintings of him all over, and some of the paintings are of like bodies cut into weird shapes and stuff.
More kooks.
Okay, more character evidence. He was a huge player. He had 11 kids from 5 different women.
Pimpin'. He's BD.
Baby daddy.
It's coming together now.
He was baby daddy.
He's BD.
He was a huge asshole. He would take his sons down into the basement and abuse them, like physically abuse them severely, and he molested his daughters.
Damn.
He lived, like I said, in this mansion and would have these swanky orgy parties in his secret room that the kids weren't allowed to go into. In October of 1949, he was accused of molesting his daughter, Tamar Hodel. She came out and accused him of molesting her. And there were 3 witnesses, adult witnesses, that confirmed that they saw him have sex with his daughter.
What the Wait, people are watching you have sex with your kid?
Maybe it was at one
of his... What are they even doing there?
Maybe it was at one of his crazy sex parties. I don't know.
People just let it rock?
I mean, you would think that people would kill him if they saw that, but... I don't know. Maybe
or at least tell someone if you saw.
Well, they confirmed. They confirmed that it did happen. He was later acquitted. He had a trial. He was
rich.
Later acquitted, and everyone thought that he paid the judge off.
Yeah, he's rich,
and he used to pay a lot of people off, and he got a lot of dirty deeds covered up with his money.
At the end of the story, he has to have ended up in jail at some point in his life.
Let me finish. So as a result, though, of this ongoing investigation about him molesting his daughter, LAPD decided they were really suspecting him for the Black Dahlia crime. So they decided to bug his home.
They had bugs back then?
Yeah, they had bugs back then. So
they barely had TVs in people's houses.
Well, they had bugs. They had 18 police officers surveilling his home and surveilling the recordings, right? But... a lot of the stuff that they recorded ended up just becoming useless to the case. There was just a lot of sex that they heard, a lot of him occasionally beating on his secretary. He used to beat her up. And then, on February 19th of 1950, at 8:25 p.m., the transcript of the recording reads, "Woman screaming, woman screaming, woman screaming again." And then in parentheses it says, "Note, the woman has not been heard before the scream." Later that night, he's recorded saying, this is what he's saying, these are his exact words, to somebody. They don't know who he's talking to. But he says, "Realized there was nothing I could do. Put a pillow over her head, cover her with a blanket, and get a taxi. She expired at 12:59. They thought it was fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured out I killed her." Right? And then a little later, he says, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead too."
Oh, dead.
So they had all these recordings of him. The secretary, her name was Ruth Spalding, and apparently she died of a drug overdose, quote unquote. He filled out her death certificate of a drug overdose.
Oh my God, is this going to be bad detective work? Like, this is a closed case.
She reportedly was about to out him for his sex parties, molesting his kids, and she was going to implicate him in multiple crimes. And then she died of an overdose. George Hodel was never charged. He lived his life, and he died in 1999.
He lived till old, probably, right?
Yeah. And then in 2003, that's when his son, Steve Hodel, published his book, his first book, claiming his father was responsible because after his, or either during his father's death, like right as he was on his deathbed or afterwards, is when Steve, the retired detective, found the pictures of Elizabeth Short.
Oh, he found
in his
them after
father's
the
stuff.
death.
Yes. And then he investigated his father like crazy, brought in the experts and everything, and then wrote the book claiming his father is responsible for the Black Dahlia and numerous other murders, and he thinks his father is a serial killer. And
bro, you found this like 50 years late. Come on, man. You seen signs. Get out of here. Your dad was probably a perv the whole time.
You knew he was a perv. He molested his own daughter. He had sex parties. He had a secret room in his mansion. He paid people off all the time.
He's writing these books 50 years later. Get out of here.
He's recorded getting his secretary either killing her or having her killed, and then filling out the death certificate saying she had an overdose. He was a disgusting human being, and he got away with it, and he died in 1999, never being caught. And to this day, the murder of Elizabeth Short is still a cold case.
LAPD, you were trash in the 40s, boy.
A 70-year cold case.
Ain't cold. We know he did it.
I know he did it. I highly recommend listening to Root of Evil. It's great. You guys should listen to it. It's awesome. And they really go into detail. Root of Evil, along with the George Hodel story, it's all about a whole other story about one of his daughters and how she even found out that she's part of this crazy-ass family. And it's just nuts. It's great. But that's the story of Elizabeth Short, a.k.a. the Black Dahlia. And how crazy is that? It was 1940s, and you would, like, everyone thought that back then, this is a wholesome time.
Not me. I don't trust soul.
It's a wholesome, yeah, but in American culture, the 40s and 50s was so wholesome. It was like, you know, right after the war.
Nope,
everyone came home.
The world was bigger back then because technology shrunk the world, so everyone knows everything. So you just weren't.
You just didn't know what was going on.
You didn't know what was going on, except like in your immediate area, and someone had to tell you.
Oh, it's crazy, right?
Guilty.
Definitely guilty. George Hodel did it.
Rotten hell, you bum.
So yeah, that's it. Interesting story, right?
Yeah, it got better at the end.
Yeah. But I found that the way that her body was mutilated was pretty crazy for that time. I mean, I guess not for that time.
Nah,
there's been sickos around
crazy.
since she was cut in half, drained of her blood.
Nah,
her whole body was drained of blood.
I watched a lot of scary movies. You see all kind of stuff.
I guess you're desensitized to things like that. But I thought it was nuts.
All right. I guess that's it.
Yeah, that's it. All right, everybody. Check out Wife of Crime pod on Instagram and wifeofcrime.com. We will see you guys next week.
Russ the Profiler out.
Bye.